Greetings to all our followers. Thank you so much for tuning in once more. This is Tsepo Mohapi with Life in Perspective. Life in Perspective, we are tuning in for your weekly discussion, conversation, motivation, whatever you want to call it. I've taken quite a bit of time from doing studio sessions. Some of you would have noticed that my videos have been done either from home or different other locations, just to maintain giving you guys content, so that I can keep you occupied, so we can continually have the conversations. We will be getting back to studio, but I think importantly for me was to take this time to finalize the book, which is coming out end of this month. It is definitely coming out end of this month, and we'll be sharing the details of the book launch and other details that are required so that we can get you guys then. For those of you who will be free on the launch date, it would be great to finally get to meet you so I can give you a signed or an autographed copy of the book. I think it's an interesting read, and some of you will find it very interesting and very encouraging and developmental in a way, and I believe it will be able to I think expose some aspects of life that I believe are very pertinent to our existence and how we deal with the dilemma of our existence. That's actually the name of the book, The Dilemma of Our Existence, and I believe this is very, very important. So last week, I actually spoke to you about the quotients. I was talking to you about the quotients, and I spoke about the different quotients, which some of you would know: the IQ, which is the intelligence quotient, the EQ, emotional quotient, and the SQ, which is the social quotient. There is AQ, which is the adversity quotient, and I added one which I called SPQ, which is the spiritual quotient. And I was explaining the importance of the quotients, and I said it goes in and around how we make sure we live a balanced life. And I said you cannot live a balanced life unless you develop yourself in and around these quotients, because these quotients play a very critical role. So with my interactions, because I'm currently now doing Saturday live sessions every Saturday from 6:30, every Saturday from 6:30 in the evening, I actually have a live session that I do with people, and some of the interactions and the questions that the guys have asked, because I allow you guys to share topics and to share, ask questions and whatever that you want to put across so that we can deal with it and address it. And one of the things I've noticed was that there's been quite a lot of relationship related discussions, a lot of relationship related questions and so forth. So I then decided to just focus on that topic today. So I managed to get a topic, and I think the topic, I can call it relationships unpacked. So we're going to discuss relationships, and I want us to call it relationships unpacked. So we are unpacking relationships. Now, I want to talk to relationships in two main aspects. The first thing I want to deal with is the two categories of relationships. And then after that, I will deal with the three types of relationships. So there's categories, which are a much bigger umbrella of what we would call relationships. And within those two main categories, you will find that there are three different types that are okay across the two categories. So it would be important for us to understand and know the relationship, because it starts with category, which is a larger and bigger sort of overview of relationships. And in those categories, you can then specifically break them down into the types of relationships, which I have classified it into three types of relationships. And I think it's going to help us a lot to sort of get a feel and have an understanding, because I think sometimes it helps for a person to be able to evaluate certain things, certain situations, certain decisions prior to you making them, certain agreements, certain engagements and interactions prior to you engaging in them, because it will help you to become more level-headed and to become more calm-minded when you are actually either making that decision or when you are actually interacting, because you interact from a very balanced, a very clear, conscious aspect, from a very conscious standpoint, where you are able to have discussions and actually make sense out of everything that's happening, and also make sense out of how people behave, and make sense out of how people talk and what people say, make sense out of what they say, so that you can have a better understanding of why you make and how you make certain decisions. So I'm going to talk to you now, relationships unpacked. So let's first talk about the two categories of relationships. So I've classified these categories into what I call involuntary and voluntary relationships. Involuntary and voluntary relationships. These are the two main categories of relationship, which means involuntary means it's those type of things that you don't actually volunteer yourself to get into, but for some reason you find yourself in them. It's not by choice, but it just happens. That's why they are involuntary. It's something that you can't control. It's something that just happens, and it's just happening. You're either born into it or it just happens because it's maybe the setting as it is. It's such that it fosters and it encourages that kind of relationship to happen. So one might ask a question and say, what are involuntary relationships then if I don't have to choose? And I'll touch on two for now, just so that I don't make the topic too long. If I look at one, it would what we call family ties. People that you relate to. It's involuntary. You never chose to your family. You never chose where to be born. You never chose who your family should be. You just were born there. And because you were born in that space, you don't have a choice but to actually live in that space because it is what it is. So what that actually means is that these are relationships that you were born into, that you can't change anything about them, and you just have to accept basically what you find yourself in. And secondly, it's inherited networks. So you will find, and I'll give an example why I talk about inherited networks. Inherited networks are those networks that have to do either with career, either with business, where you find other people, family members have involved themselves in certain relationships, certain contractual obligations, certain spaces, and they found themselves in a space where if they pass away, because it's an ongoing business, it's an ongoing relationship, that whoever comes and takes over the family business will have to inherit those networks. You will have to inherit them. And this becomes very important because when you inherit those networks, you inherit them on the basis of the fact that they were actually there and there's nothing you can do about them. Hence, we call them involuntary, which it's very, very important for us to understand why they are involuntary relationships, because those involuntary relationships basically talk to the fact that you need to understand your family ties. You need to understand the fact that it's family, that you can't choose, that you can't decide, that you can't actually, there's nothing that you can do to actually not be part of, because you were born there. It's not by choice. And also certain things that we inherit, whether it's an inheritance or whether it's a family business, whether it's something, it's a business that has been handed over to you by a family member, or whatever the case might be that you inherit. And you'd find that sometimes there are certain networks that you also inherit because maybe your uncle is linked to some people or your father is linked to some people, and by virtue of you being a son or a family member to that person, you automatically belong to that network because of the nature of the network that it is. So those are involuntary. There's actually nothing you can do about it. And then there's what we call voluntary relationships. Voluntary relationships come by choice. They come by choice because you decide whether you want to be part of them or not. And those type of relationships are relationships. There are three types of those that I've highlighted. I didn't want to go into more either because I didn't want to overextend the conversation. You look at friendships. Friendships is one of those relationships that you decide. You decide. Yes, you can be born and inherit neighborhood people that are there that become your friends because you are young, but ultimately as time goes you will find yourself in a space where some of those relationships you might not entertain any further as you grow older because it's voluntary, and some of them you might choose to entertain because they're still voluntary. You choose or not choose to. It's entirely up to you. You are not forced or attached or obliged to actually remain in those relationships, and that becomes important to understand because they are voluntary. You find romantic relationships as well, where people get into a relationship, where people get married, and all of those other types of relationship where people are romantically connected. And that is also by choice because you choose who you ultimately romantically get involved in. You choose whoever you ultimately associate with as a person. That is by choice. So it is voluntary. You make the decision. You decide how you actually want it to be structured. And then the other type of voluntary relationship is what we would call business or career. Business or career, it's voluntary. There are some, yes, I did mention business because of networks on the involuntary, but there are those aspects as well of business relationship that are voluntary, where you can actually decide who you want to relate with business wise, who you want to enter into agreements with, who you want to partner with, joint venture with, or be in business with, whoever you want to be involved with or connected to business wise, or have them in their value chain or in your value chain, or have them as a supplier or you supply them, or whatever the case might be. Whatever the case might be, all of that will be purely based on what we call choice. You will have to voluntarily decide whether this is what you want to do or not. And this becomes very important because then you know that in these main categories that are there, whether you decide that you're going to have a relationship because you choose to have that relationship, or that relationship will come because it's involuntary, you've inherited it, it was there, or it's a family tie where you are linked to people by blood. It is what it is. There's absolutely nothing you can do with involuntary relationships most of the time. But either way, you can still to end them if you decide to end them. But what I'm basically trying to say is those are the type of relationships that you find yourself in. You are either born into it or it is handed over to you because of someone else that preceded you. Now, I want to now talk about the types of relationships that exist within these main categories. So the categories and then the types. Now, within these main categories, you will find that there are 3 main types. There might be more, but I'm focusing on these 3 for now because I think they address what my followers have been trying to address in some of the questions that they've been giving me. So let's deal with the first one. The first type, in fact, let me give you all 3 of them. It will be the transactional type of relationship. Transactional type of relationship. Normally, those are short-lived. Sentimental types of relationships. They are also short-lived. So it's transactional, it's sentimental, and the last one is the value-based relationship. The value-based relationship generally is long-lived. So transactionals are short-lived, sentimental are short-lived, and then you've got the value-based, which are long-lived. Now let's start with transactional. Transactional normally is by preference. It's by preference. Whenever you get yourself into a transactional relationship, it will be by preference. You might find that some of these transactional relationships are voluntary or involuntary. It's up to you. You'll be able to assess what type of relationship you are in, even if you are in a transactional one. It might be voluntarily, it might be involuntary. It really does not matter that much. But what is important is for you to understand when you are in a transactional relationship, understand that it is a transactional relationship and be able to classify it as either a voluntary or involuntary, because voluntary or involuntary actually gives you the power to decide where this thing must go. Like I said, even if it's involuntary, you can still choose to end it. But ultimately, what it boils down to is you need to then have an understanding of what a transactional relationship is. So let's look at the word transaction. What does the word transaction actually mean? The word transaction means trade. Now, you will find that many a times a lot of people get into relationships transactionally because there is some form of an exchange. There is some form of an exchange. So if you look at trade, what trade actually means is that I buy and sell, or I sell and buy, or whatever the case might be. There is some form of trade that happens. So you will find that many a times in a relationship, people find themselves in spaces where they enter a relationship simply because there is a potential transaction that is beneficial, either for the one party or for both parties. Either for the one party or for both parties. But whatever the case might be, that relationship is transactional because there is what? An exchange. And this becomes very important because what it means is that you need to have an understanding that in this type of relationship, it's more like you are doing a business. You are conducting business. Now, you will find some friendships. You will find some romantic relationships. You will find even some family ties where people only get along because there is something to transact. People only like each other for as long as there is something to transact, whether it is a parasitic type of transaction where a person gains more from you than you are gaining from them. That is still a transaction, because what it means is that because there is an exchange, sometimes they might exchange their kindness for your money. They might exchange their kindness for your attention. They might exchange their kindness for favors. There is a lot of things that can be exchanged. And in this day and age, you will see it. This space is very, very dynamic because people are willing to go through different lengths to actually transact in a relationship and actually get into a relationship purely from a transactional base. It has nothing else leaning on it except that I have something to gain and I'm entering into this simply because I can gain something out of it and I can give whatever that I need to give for me to gain what I want to gain. So that is mainly what motivates a lot of people when it comes to relationship, especially in situations where People don't want their emotions to be attached. They don't want their emotions to connect to people. People tend to lean towards what we call transactional relationships. But transactional relationship, as you would know, there is no transaction that is forever. There is no transaction that remains forever. Every single transaction that exists, whether it's a transaction in business, whether it's a transaction personally, whatever transaction that you will find, you will realize that there is a time that is allocated to it, and it can only continue for so long. Even if you get into a relationship where you are using a person, or you are claiming to love them, and you are using them because to you is transactional. It's more about what you are gaining from that than anything else. Ultimately, it will get to a point where some of that truth will come out and the transaction might cease to exist. Or you might find that, a person will figure you out after some time and realize, oh no man, here I'm being used. This person is always kind to me every time when they need something. Some people know they have family members. That family member only calls you when they're in trouble. When they're not in trouble, they will never call you. They'll never call you and ask you about your wife, your kids, your close relatives or any. They will never call you about you, checking up on you, whether you are healthy, are you okay, this or that. No, they will never call you. The only time they will do that is when they need something from you, because that relationship is transactional. So you need to be aware of the fact that some people, in as much as you might care for them, in as much as you might love them, in as much as you might appreciate and value them, some people are in your life because this is a transaction, and you need to open your eyes and have that understanding, so that if you continue to interact with them at that space, you interact with them from a basis that says, I understand that I'm in a transaction with this person. Why do we need to have that understanding? You need to have that understanding because many a times people get hurt. People end up bitter, people end up angry because they have failed to figure out that the type of relationship they have with a specific individual is a more transactional relationship than anything else. Now, some of those relationships are involuntary, where it's a family member. Some of those relationships are voluntary, whether it's either a friend or someone you are romantically involved with or someone that you are in business with. You will find that those people are just only there because there is something to gain for them. They are just only there because there's something for them to benefit. And if you don't have that understanding, you are always going to want to expect from people who are not there to feed your interest, but they are there to only feed their own interest, because to them it is transactional, and they always have to make sure that in everything that happens, they actually get the transaction through. And that is their main focus. Why? Because this is a transactional relationship, and it is by preference. So they prefer to transact. It's driven by preference. There are certain things they desire in life. There are certain things they want in life. There are certain things they wish in life. And when they perceive you as a person, you are the preferred candidate to satisfy those needs. You are the preferred candidate to satisfy those desires. You are the preferred candidate to satisfy every single thing that they want at that point in time. You will find that many a times, even people that get into relationships because a person is handsome or a person is beautiful, or at that point in time, that is what they value in that person. So to them, they transact that beauty for whatever that they will give to that person. It's still a transaction, where you will have a person they call a trophy boyfriend, where when I walk with this guy in public, I just feel like I've made it in life. It's not about what you guys share, but it has everything to do with the transaction that this person experiences when they are with you. And whether you're a woman, beautiful, good looking, a person walks around with you and they flaunt you because it makes them feel good. Showing you off like that, it's a transaction to them. It is not actually a valuable relationship, but it's a transactional relationship. And you need to understand that, so that you do not have expectations that are beyond what you should be expecting, because you understand that the nature of relationship you have with that person is transactional. And many a times, the unfortunate part is that this is never discussed. It's never discussed. It just happens. It's like one of those relationships you get into where people keep secrets and they don't talk about why they are there in the first place. And sometimes they might even lie and say, no, I'm here for 1, 2, 3 reasons, and it's actually not. So the second one that I want to deal with is sentimental relationships. Sentimental relationships are prompted by feelings. This is what is driven by feelings, where a person is infatuated, or a person is excited to be around a person, or you make a person feel good. Therefore, we end up as friends. Or sometimes it could be tenderness, that you experience from a person. There's a certain level of tenderness. They show care. They show attention towards you. They show you things that you don't necessarily get from other people. Thereby, you end up either becoming friends with them, or you end up being romantically involved with them, or you end up being in business with them, because you feel valued, you feel seen, you feel that person sees you, that person acknowledges you, and you get into a relationship with them. Because of how they make you feel, you get into a relationship. Now, whether it's friendship, romantic, business, or career, it really does not matter, but you will find yourself in that type of relationship because of how that person makes you feel. But that is also short-lived. Why? Because feelings and emotions change over time. You might like a person now, 2 years, 3 years down the line, you don't necessarily feel the same anymore. That is why you will find that many a times when relationships, especially romantic relationships, when they are motivated by these type of feelings, tenderness, and sometimes there are relationships that are actually motivated by sadness or pain or grief, where people get together and become close with each other simply because they are going through the same grief, or they're experiencing the same pain, or they're experiencing the same. It's like how two people can go through a breakup and they become friends simply because they share the same pain of being either dumped or dumping another person. And they become friends because when they talk the same language. When they try to relate about how they feel, they understand each other because those emotions are shared and they are equal. That is also not a value relationship. And many a times they do not last long, because as soon as each of you outgrow those negative feelings of sadness, grief, anger, and whatnot, the chances are that relationship might not actually find survival. It might not find a way to survive, which is what I actually want to emphasize, to say this is why I'm saying sentimental relationships are sometimes not long-lived. Yes, some of them can go for a bit long, but they will not last for too long because of the fact that they are based on emotions. And some of them are based on nostalgia. They are based on nostalgia, things that happened in the past, things that, some people would enter even in a relationship because of something that happened in the past. They would relate with one another because of something that happened in the past. They would associate with one another because of something that has happened. And sometimes it might be something that has happened now that actually gets us into a space where we tend to relate because we experience the same thing. You'll find people that get involved in the same accident. Sometimes they might even connect and become friends. Sometimes they might even connect and connect romantically. Sometimes they might even connect and realize they have business aspirations. There are people who might end up in the same ward in hospital because of maybe sickness or whatever the case might be, and they end up sharing the same space. They can either become friends. Some of them can even end up dating. Some of them can even end up relating in other different ways, business wise or career wise. They can end up, because normally sentimental relationships are just purely based on how people make each other feel. It can either be both-sided, it can be one-sided. It entirely depends on the individuals. But the bottom line is that sentimental values are prompted by feelings of happiness, feelings of tenderness, feelings of sadness, grief, and pain, feelings of nostalgia. Those feelings are what generally puts those people together. But please note, those relationships do not last for long either. The one that I like the most, which is the one I've been talking about throughout my talks, is the value-based relationship. Now, let's look at what is value. What is value? Value is that thing that is associated with principles. Value is that thing that is associated with standards. So when you think of a person's principles, that's value. If you think of a person's standards, that is value. If you think of a person's worth, their worth is produced by their value. So when you look at a person's importance or benefit, whether they are beneficial or not. Now, this is one of the reasons why these are long-lived, because they are actually sustainable. They are sustainable simply because they are based on values. And values, like I said even last week, they are based on belief systems. So many times you will find that it's very few relationships where people actually sit and have a discussion around what they believe. Have a discussion around what their belief system looks like, what their values are, what they like, what they don't like. You'll find that many times, even in relationships, people skip a lot of stages and they end up in the I love you zone before they even get to know each other, before they even have gone through the talking stage. And it becomes a bit of a challenge. Now, it's important for us to understand the value-based relationships, because these value-based relationships, and I'm not saying the others are not important, but I'm saying, for an example, if you can have 80% of your decision towards a relationship, whether it's a friendship, romantic, business or career relationship being influenced by value-based aspect, and then probably 80% of it is value-based, and sentimental is 10 and transactional is 10, the likelihood of that relationship is surviving is actually very high, because what it means is that these people have set a series of values and principles that they have used as a point of attraction to the two of them. We are attracted to each other because we share the same values. We are attracted to each other because we share the same principles. We are attracted to each other because we see value in each other. To me, I see you worthy of me, and you see me worthy of you. I see you as an important part of my life and my future. I see you as useful. You are very useful in my life. I see you as beneficial. But by me having you in my life, it has brought a lot of benefits. It's brought a lot of advantages in my life. And that becomes important. And when you look at that person, you say, what I see between us is sustainable. You see, when you base a relationship on those bases, it becomes something that is actually very, very, very valuable and can continue for a very long time. Many a times we find ourselves in spaces where, in fact, in this day and age, a lot of relationships are mainly sentimental and transactional. And what's even worse is because we have moved away from value-based relationships and gone to sentimental relationships. Some people, yes, they're getting into relationships because of feelings and emotions, but now people are slowly moving out of that as well. We are getting worse. We are even getting into a space where relationships are just purely transactional. Nothing else but transactional. And that's becoming a problem because it's causing, that is why you'll hear a lot of people talk about Jolo is a scam, Jolo this, Jolo that. The question is, what type of relationship are you getting into? Have you predetermined and defined what you are getting yourself into? Because if it's a transactional relationship, I bet you it's not going to last long. So if it lasts for 6 months, don't be surprised, because that's the nature of the relationship you find yourself in. If it lasts only for a year or 2 years and it's finished, don't be surprised. That's the nature of the relationship you got yourself into. But if you develop a value-based relationship, you might find that it takes a while to start. But because there's been a lot of groundwork prior to you getting there, which leads me to talking to you about the stages of a relationship according to me, according to my understanding of what I believe should be the stages of getting into a relationship, plays a very critical role in this, because then you begin to realize. So this is how I've highlighted it. I said the first stage is self-love or self-value. The stages of getting into a relationship. You need to start with yourself. You see, if you don't understand the importance of valuing yourself without a man or woman around you, valuing your skills and your abilities where career is concerned before anyone compliments you, valuing your innovations, your entrepreneurship, your ideas, your concepts prior to anyone praising you for any of them, valuing your ability to love and to care for others, valuing yourself, your qualities as a person, valuing those qualities to a level where you begin to have so much self-confidence as a person because you understand and you know what you carry so well, that it actually builds your own confidence. It builds what we call self-love, where you prioritize yourself as a person and you have an understanding to say, I will not put myself in a space that compromises my inner peace. I will never put myself in a space that compromises my self-confidence. I will never put myself in a space that compromises my self-worth. I will never put myself in a space that compromises my standards, my values, my usefulness, and all these other good things that are in me. I will never put myself in a space where I compromise any of those things because I value them so much and I love myself so much. So once you get yourself into a space where you can have that appreciation while you are still singing, that appreciation of yourself, the next stage then would be what I call self-understanding, where you then begin to understand yourself better. For an example, I don't see how a man or a woman can bring another person into their lives when they don't, themselves, they don't even know what plans they have for themselves. They don't even know what is it they've planned for their future. They don't even know where they are going. They don't even have a plan for their own lives. And they bring another unknown into the mix. They already themselves are an unknown, and they bring another unknown into the mix, and it just complicates things. No wonder you will find that many a time relationships don't last that long anymore, simply because we don't actually take the time to be honest enough with ourselves and say, do I love myself enough to know that I am the priority? Do I love myself enough to actually show myself care? prior to me expecting another person to show me care? Do I love myself enough to give myself enough love before I expect someone else to love me more than I love myself? I honestly cannot expect a person to love me more than I love myself. It's not possible. So if I have learned to love myself, I have learned to appreciate myself, I have learned to value myself, I have learned to put a certain level of worth on myself, it will change the way I interact with the rest of the people around me, because I will have self-worth and self-value, self-importance and self-understanding. Now, after you've self-understood, after you've put yourself in a space where there are certain things that you understand about yourself that you know very well, you need to then get yourself into a space where you have what we call a talking stage with whoever you want to get into a relationship with. Yes, you see them, you like them for whatever reason, but talk to them. Find out if there is more to this person than just the feelings and the transaction. Because yes, many a times you are never attracted to a person by their value. You are probably attracted to a person by what you see on the outside. But then afford yourself the opportunity to interact with that person so that you can find their value, so you can find their worth, so you can find and understand their principles and their standards. What is their belief system? For you to be able to actually love something that is more sustainable, something that is more long staying, something that exists for longer in a person than just feelings and what they have because of transactions. And we transact because we see people having certain things that we feel we also want to have, that we feel we want them to share with us. So we transact with them. And in a relationship, we transact because of that. Sometimes we transact because I feel certain things, when I'm around you. You make me feel in a certain way when I'm around you. I transact, but that's not long lived. But you need to transact based on value, which is what I'm saying. Then the talking stage becomes important. And beyond the talking stage is what we call reaching common ground prior to you now getting into a relationship. Why do you have to reach common ground? I touched on a scripture last week where I say two cannot walk together unless they agree. Two cannot walk together unless they agree. Unless they decide that this is where we are going and this is how we are going to get there. This is the time that we are going to live. They cannot travel together. Unless two people decide this is the kind of relationship we want, this is how we want the relationship to look like, this is what we aspire, this is what we are growing towards, that relationship has no future because there's no plan around it. So when people don't plan how they want to date and how they want to have their relationships look like and find common ground, when those people fail to plan, they are planning to fail. When they don't plan, when they don't plan the way they want to go and where they want to go and how they want to achieve it, they are planning to fail. Failure to plan is planning to fail. And this becomes important for us to understand because it basically and simply says to us, relationships can work well. Relationships can be good and be fulfilling. But we need to understand, where are we? Are we transactional? Are we sentimental? Or are we value-based? Are we transactional? Are we sentimental? Or are we value-based? Understand where you find yourself today, and you are going to lessen your expectations on people. People will hurt you less because you will have a better understanding of how they are either transacting with you or how they are giving you sentiments or how they are actually wanting to discover value with you so they can build something sustainable. This is all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you so much.